Perfect. So welcome everyone to Safety at Workplace. Today's topic is working alone. And we are here, Randy and I, from Sales and Service Safety Association and CheckMate, Working Alone, providing you with this important information that hopefully will be a very helpful information for you to implement at your workplaces. So a little bit of our introductions. My name is Kat. I'm a senior safety advisor at S2SA. I have experience in health and safety for the last 13 years. I've been, in those years, I have been working in different industries like oil and gas, manufacturing, healthcare. I'm also an industrial microbiologist. So hopefully we provide you today with an information that you can use and implement within your workplace. So Randy, your turn for your introduction here.
Yes, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Kat, and thank you to everyone for joining us today to learn a little bit more about this common hazard of working alone that, so many of us face in our roles, and that employers are often, or maybe are not fully aware of, or are often challenged with how best to manage. So I'm very glad to be co-hosting with Kat today, and it's great to have our partnership with S2SA and bring attention to this, important area of safety or of your overall safety management system. So my name is Randy Pokrant with Protelic Security and Safety. And just to tell you very brief a little bit about our company, as some of you may know, Protelic is a family-owned Manitoba-based company that has been around for over 55 years now, servicing customers, through our security division, in areas like traditional burglary and fire, intrusion monitoring, camera systems, access control, after-hours call answering, all those sorts of areas. And although we started as a security company since 2003, and through a request that had come in from one of our clients at the time, we developed our CheckMate Working Alone safety monitoring system as a way of helping this client and thousands of companies across North America ever since then, with a real simple to use, reliable way of managing this hazard. So, and that not only ensures compliance, but also ensures, people are protected when they're working under this hazard condition. Just all of our services, I'll just mention as well, are backed by our own local ULC certified emergency monitoring center that's been operating, 24/7 since our company first opened back in 1968. So that supports all of our services, including our CheckMate service. And just in an effort to match time, I won't get into the details of my career right now, but I'll just say I'm very pleased to be, sharing a bit of what I've learned over the past several years around this important area of safety and pervasive area of safety that we know folks are often concerned about, but may not know exactly what all is required or exactly where to start. So, glad to be here with you today and looking forward to today's presentation. With that, Kat, I'll turn things back over to you to kind of start our part one of today's presentation.
Thank you, Randy. So as Randy just mentioned, we have two parts for today's webinar. The first part, I will be talking about what is important or the importance of protecting lone workers. So we are going to review some definitions and examples of working alone and working in isolation to understand what is the difference between these two terms, and with some examples to understand better when we are talking about working alone and when it's working in isolation. Then we will review the legal requirements that applies provincially here in Manitoba. And I will end the part one with some safety tips on how to implement those controls or how to provide evidence that you are in compliance with the legal requirements. And then in part two, Randy will take over this part and he will explain the challenge and how to implement best practices to control those situations and the hazards around working alone. So he will be explaining an overview of the three components to a working alone solution and also the component details and best practices. So let's begin with part one with definitions. And when we were Randy and I were talking and constructing this content for you. We both agree on how important it's to have the definitions clear and starting with the base, right? So the first definition, I'm not jumping straight to the working alone definition, but the first definition that you need to have clarity on, it's a workplace. So what is the definition of a workplace? What is consider a workplace in Manitoba? So, workplace means any building, site, workshop, structure, mine, mobile vehicle, or any other premises or location, whether indoors or outdoors, in which one or more workers or even self employed persons are engaged in work or have worked. So when we read this definition, we know now that the workplace is more than your workstation or just the office or the workshop that I'm working in. Everything like it's more than that. It's beyond that. So any building, any time that you are performing a work, a task related to the work, even if you are one day working from your home, then that would be your workplace for the day. Okay, so that's the first thing that it's important for you to have clarity on, that definition. What is a workplace? Now let's review the definitions for working alone and working in isolation. So first we have working alone. And here we are talking about a worker who is the only person working at the work site without direct supervision and access to emergency assistance, right? So we have one worker working by themselves with no supervision. That would be working alone. But then we also have working in isolation. And here we are talking about a worker who cannot be heard or seen by any other person or is working in a location where the assistance is not readily available in the event of injury, illness, or an emergency. So I know it's separately, when you read those definitions, they're really easy to understand. But maybe when you combine those two definitions, it's like, okay, but it seems very like the same definition, but hopefully with the examples that I'm about to share with you, you can understand better the difference between working alone and working in isolation. And again, I didn't mention this, but if you have questions already, just type a message to us. And by the end of the presentation, we will review any questions that you have. Okay, so let's review first some examples of working alone. We have here a worker working in the shop or in office after hours by themselves. So every time we have a technician who is in the shop and decide to finish the work after hours, when everyone left the workshop, then that worker is working, it's considered to be working alone. Okay, it's by herself, no supervision. So it's working alone. Another example here, and this is really an interesting one for working alone. So persons who are working on sales, whoever is working in sales or with the public by yourself, despite interaction with customers, that would be another situation for working alone. So we have only one salesperson who belongs to that employer. And despite the fact that this person is interacting with the customer, like it's not alone per se, they have more human beings around them, but it's the only worker of that employer who is performing the task that is considered work. So that would be another example for working alone. Let's say, for example, if you are a salesperson, this picture, it's more like for a retail business, right? But let's say if in a dealership, the salesperson, the sales force, sometimes they go with their customers to try the car, right? And they have the customers who are driving the car and testing the car. So they are with more people in the car, but they are working alone. Yeah, they have no supervisions. They are by themselves in terms of worker of that employer. So that would be another situation or example of working alone. And the last example that I have here, it's driving. So any work that involves driving by yourself would be considered working alone. So if your company give you a car or have a fleet vehicles to for you to go from place A to B while you are driving by yourself, that would be another example or situation of working alone. Okay, now let's move on and review some examples of working in isolation. So usually, and the term itself make us think of, okay, working in isolation, maybe it's if I'm working in a remote site. And that's why I put here our first example. It's working in a remote area where emergency services will not be able to get to you immediately or at all. So that indeed, it is an example of working in isolation. If you are working in remote areas within the province, that would be a description, an example, and a situation that it's considered working in isolation. But it's not everything. So also, if we have a worker working in a storage room that people rarely use, then that worker would be working in isolation. And maybe this storage room is in the workplace. It's part of the building, but it's a place that no one goes. So that worker that would be performing some task in there will be working or consider working in isolation the time he was spending in that storage room. Okay, so it's not just when we are talking about working in isolation, it's not just about working in a remote area. It also includes when someone is working in that place, in that room, when no one else access in a frequent basis. So that worker will be by herself. No one can hear them if they need help. So that's why that would be working in isolation too. Okay, so the idea here is while I'm explaining to you, you can think in your own workplaces and any situation that you are considering maybe or having the doubt, is this working alone or in isolation? Maybe you can relate with the examples here and come up with the final, okay, this is actually a working alone situation and working in isolation situation. And therefore, you need to implement some controls in those situations. So now let's review the legal requirements within the province. So we have here our legal requirements, safety-related legal requirements. We have it in the Act and Regulation in Manitoba. And specifically, and all the definitions that we just review are part of the regulation part 1 specifically, when you will find the definitions and general matters. 1.1 definitions, there you can find the definitions that I just read and share with you. That information is in there. But also we have in part 9 of the regulation, the specific topic and the specific requirements that are expected for the employers to comply with in terms of working alone or in isolation. And the content of this part includes the application. So how are you going to identify these situations? Then the risk identification, and lastly, the safe or procedures that you need to develop. Okay, so let's dig in more here on detail on the legal requirements. So this is the part 9, like kind of the summary of the part 9 requirements. So what part 9 says is that the first thing you need to do is spot the hazards or risk. So what you need to do is identify those risks that are arising from the conditions and circumstances of the workers work in isolation or work alone. And you have to do this in consultation with the safety committee or representative. Remember that everything that you are doing in terms of safety, implementing or developing controls, you need to involve the safety committee or the rep according with any of your or the specific on your workplace. Whether if you have a committee or a rep, you need to go and talk with them and include them in this evaluation too. So once you have spot the hazard, you need to assess the risk. You need to do a risk assessment to evaluate the unique work conditions to determine the risk level and implement the appropriate controls. And remember here that you will find like every single situation is different one from another. So the hazards are different, and therefore the controls needs to be in consequence of the hazards that you have identified for that specific situation. So it's not the same if we have a worker who is working after hours in a weekend or in the really late in the night. So it's different, and each situations will have a unique work conditions or risks that we need to assess. Once we have done that, we need to find a safer way to do or perform that task. So take the steps to eliminate or reduce the identified risk to workers working alone or working in isolation. So here we are remembering about the hierarchy of control, try to eliminate the hazards. If that is not possible, then think of substitution. But if not, then we need to go with the administrative controls, have engineering controls. And I guess, Randy, in your part, you're going to talk about these solutions that are part of the engineering controls, technology that we can use as a controls here, finding a safer way to do that task. And last, we have as a legal requirement that we need to develop a safer procedure. So any employer that had identified any task that it's being performed in like working alone or in isolation, they have to develop a safer procedure, train the workers on that safer procedure, and ensures or enforce the compliance with that safer procedure. And this is what that safer procedure needs to have according to the regulation. So we need to have an effective communication system, whether it's radio communication, telephone, cell phone, or any other means that provide effective communication given the risks involved. The second is have any of the following. The first option is a system of regular contact by the employer with the worker working alone or in isolation. And I have this really highlight here because that is actually what Randy is going to explain to you in this part 2 of this webinar. Also, we need to have limitations or prohibitions of specified activities and establishment of training requirements too. When applicable, the provisions of emergency supplies for use in traveling or working under conditions of extreme cold or other inclement weather conditions. So if you have a worker who is traveling or driving a car, make sure that they have everything available for them to have like a first aid attention in case that anything happened. Once you have developed this safer procedure, you need to post it conspicuously in the workplace and make sure that you are reviewing the content every 3 years or sooner if the circumstances at the workplace change. So these are some examples of the hazards that you can identify in working alone or in isolation. Some of the physical hazards are the possibility of have incidents, health emergencies, and lack of emergency responses. And we also have psychological hazards here. So social isolation, stress and anxiety, disconnections, and even burnout. You need to consider those too. So finally, this is some of the safety tips that we want to share with you today. So let's start here. Avoid having workers work alone whenever possible, but if definitely you need to do it, make sure that you are in compliance with all the legal requirements. And especially for those jobs with a recognized risk or really high risk, you need to consider the elimination part of those risks. Then you need to assess the risks in the workplace. Report to your supervisor if you are required to work alone or find yourself in a work alone situation so they can act accordingly. Establish a check-in procedure. Make sure that regular contact is kept with all workers. And this is also something that Randy will be covering in his part. provide appropriate training to both the alone worker and person tasked to respond if there is a concern. So once you have established this worker will be working alone, and this is the person who is going to act as the main contact for them, they both need to know their role in this working alone situation. Not only the worker who is actually working alone, but also the person who is supposed to be aware of that worker. Okay, so that's why training is important. And finally, develop a travel plan when you drive somewhere alone. Ensure vehicles are well maintained to avoid any breakdowns. So those are some of the safety tips that I have to share with you today. And with that, I finish my part. It's just like an introduction to the main content that we have today for you. So Randy, you can take over now, explaining us about the challenge that all this implies, and of course, the solutions that you provide for these situations.
Sounds good, Kat. Thank you. I'm just going to take over sharing here the screen.
Sure.
The screen now, Kat?
Yeah.
Perfect. So yes, so everyone, that's just a recap, maybe where we're at now here. We've reviewed that this is, a common hazard that many folks will face in their roles, and Kat provided some great examples there of where the hazard may exist in certain industries or certain roles themselves. And we've covered, some key definitions and specific requirements of an employer as they're laid out in the regulations, in Part 9 of the working alone or working in isolation regulations. And I've always thought too, as and just going back to the definitions, and I think about that definition of a workplace and how, we really need to understand the definitions before we can look at the regulations, because it speaks to those terms and that in those regulations. So that's where, when we really look at things like, what a workplace is defined as, or a work site, and then look back at it in the definitions of working alone or working in isolation, it really tells us that this is, there is not too many times or places that we are often going to be working alone or working in isolation. So really, it leads it to now is what's the challenge, and really the challenge we think here is identifying an effective and of course affordable solution. There we go. So, through our experience over the last few years, we have found for the clients that we've worked with, and the ones that have done, this well in terms of implementing a system, for their teams, that it's really three key components that need to be considered. And, we need to first have, the operational system or a tool in place that our staff can use. And the system should be, there to monitor our staff's well-being with regular safety checks. It needs to be, simple to use, simple to turn on and off, have a variety of features to ensure that, we can track, maybe the user's location, ability to adjust frequency based on risks and those sorts of things. And the system needs to have the ability to, signal for an emergency if the lone worker needs help, either automatically if the person fails to respond to a safety check, or if, the ability to allow a person to generate an emergency alarm, manually if in a critical moment of need. So that's kind of part one. And then in tandem with that, in tandem with the operational system is, another key part is ensuring that we have very clear policies and procedures in place for working alone. And this is not, of course, unique. And just like all other parts of your safety management system, it is important that we, provide these policies and procedures for our staff to follow. And I'll speak to that in a bit more detail in a moment. And really all of this here, is building towards the third key component is that culture of safety. So let's start here by just looking at this at a slightly different way. I always like kind of visuals as well, and that's really what we've done with this slide here, is just kind of created, the visual of the cogs of the gears here, where we've looking at the working alone system, the policies and procedures, and that culture of safety, which is really all harnessed in those specific regulations that Kat had covered earlier in part one. So key component on number one here is, we've been talking about these policies and procedures in place. And, I really look at policies and procedures as being a roadmap for staff or a set of instructions to help them know, what is this system all about and how and why, they should use it, why we put this system in place for them. And again, this obviously is not unique to just working alone, but we've seen time and time again that companies that do this part well, and again in tandem with implementing the engineered control, is that they tend to have a smoother launch and a better chance of long-term support and usage of the system. And really, which in all of this, it really ensures that your company is compliant and your people, most importantly, that your people are protected. So that is certainly a key part of this. And again, that all kind of builds into the creating that culture of safety in the workplace. So we've talked about it here being that it starts with those policies and procedures. And we know that there's a lot that goes involved, or a lot involved, and this can be very challenging for organizations to continue to create that culture of safety. And there's a lot at stake if we aren't always trying to work on this. But I think employers that work on this, and we know we're so challenged now with trying to retain good employees and engage employees within your organization. So when you can demonstrate that you care about them and that you are providing them with the tools to keep them safe, well, I think many employees or most employees will really appreciate that. So that's an important part. But it all starts with, I say, leading by example, which I think is the most important part of all of this. And we need to set the tone within the organization as leaders. And I know with any folks that have children, when you think about trying to convince your kids to do something, and if you're not willing to do it yourself, well, your kids can pick up on that immediately. So don't let that happen. There are laws in place that your company must obey, and the requirements of you as a supervisor that you are responsible for to ensure that you're keeping your team safe. So, it's not a choice. It's really a legal requirement, and we can't pick and choose the laws that we, choose to obey. And so let's lead by example, and I'm certain that it will pay dividends for you and your organization in doing this. And the last, key component that I want to talk about here is really the system of regular contact, or really what is the best, operational solution or best practices in terms of managing this hazard here. And maybe you can think about, maybe what your company does right now. But so let's look at, one of the areas that we commonly hear about is sort of what we've defined here as the that in-house system, and some of the challenges that are faced when you're trying to do this with sort of that in-house system. And we've talked about some of these right now in some of these bullet points here, that it needs to be designed by the company first and foremost. And there's a lot that goes into trying to do that. It relies on individuals to do things and follow established protocols in a consistent and timely manner. And that's really becomes probably the biggest challenge is when we put this in the hands of people to do. People get busy, and often things just don't occur when they should be. And there's manual follow up and assessment, and all of this too is one thing about if we're with any part of our safety management systems is we have to have that audit trail, the documentation for proof of due diligence and compliance. And we know that'll be one of the first things that will be asked for if there ever is an incident. And that's another part of that, is that's something that's very challenging to complete and maintain. And so I know over the last several years, when I've been chatting with folks that are involved with this, and they're coming to us with these exact challenges. They've tried to been doing this in-house and having some real challenges on people forgetting to do this. Their system isn't working. Nobody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I quite often hear from maybe the person that's tasked with trying to track their people and do their check-ins, and they often tell me they don't even know who's working alone and when they're working alone, and never mind trying to actually do the safety checks on these individuals. So it presents a lot of problems, and yes, costly, and both in terms of time and trying to develop the system and actually doing this. So there is better ways. When we talk about here, what about using technology to implement a better way to control this hazard? So we're kind of defining this sort of as what would be called a professional system to manage this hazard. And there's key components that are required. And we look at it as sort of end user at the user level components, administrative components, and then some additional features. And I'm not going to, get into all of these today in too much detail, but there are some, certainly some key ones that maybe I'll touch on here. Is that first and foremost, having that automated safety monitoring with reliable safety checks, and have that be server based, that it's not tied directly to. So there are systems out there that maybe it's tied to a phone, and if it's say if a cell phone went dead or something for some reason, safety checks would stop. But you want a system where that is not tied to that phone, and those safety checks will never stop occurring. And that automation at that level, that ensures that reliability and that consistency, and that people, those safety checks will always keep occurring, no matter what. And really ensuring people are protected, and that timely assistance can be provided if an incident ever did occur. So that's an important part. We talk about live monitoring. So a key component of our system is that we do have our emergency monitoring center to respond. There's automation at the front end, but there's, I think, some importance to have live monitoring as a backup and during critical events. User friendliness. So that's a key part. Is we know that anything we implement, any type of system we implement for any reason, if people don't find it user friendly and are frustrated with it, then you're just not going to get that buy-in, and people aren't going to use it. So if you're going to implement a system, make sure it's simple for people to do it and it doesn't take up a lot of their time. And that's certainly something, with systems out there, to have an app-based system where you can tap a button for safety, tap a button to start your safety checks, tap a button to check in. That makes it very simple, and again, people appreciate that. So that's an important part. Location tracking, having various methods of location tracking when someone isn't responding, that is a key part as well. We need to know where people are, and to have the ability to provide, multiple methods of location information, whether it's GPS coordinates that are being collected, or written text descriptions, or voice recordings that can be for journey management, and people can, explain where they're going, and have this again be a simple format for them to provide this information. That's that critical information that is needed if people aren't responding. So maybe one other one is safety check frequency, and having the ability to, we know that at times our risks, our hazard level or the risk level will change, and there might be certain tasks where we're doing or where we may need safety checks more often. And to, of course, we want to have that defined through those risk assessments and through those policies and procedures with, your staff. But to have that quick ability for a user to be able to change their frequency, to increase their safety checks if needed, that's an important part as well for higher risk situations. And then again, to have that complete audit trail, there's the nice thing about automated professional systems is they will have, that complete audit trail, administrator dashboard, all that information is there for proof of due diligence and compliance. So those are some of the key features. We have a lone worker safety monitoring checklist that provides a lot of these features and some of the key components that are required. And if, to kind of create a comprehensive system. And if this is something that you're interested in receiving from us here, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to just share that with you. So, or through Kat too. So, this is just a short video of an example of our, it's a clip from one of our videos here, but I'll just play this right now for you guys, and then we'll continue on. Well, it says we cannot play this video at the moment, so I'm not exactly sure why that is happening. But I will continue on here. Those videos that are on our site and available for everybody to view at another time. So just a slide here, kind of recapping some of the ways we are supporting our clients, and just to kind of give you a kind of a scope of the number of we are protecting literally thousands of lone workers across North America, and that's just kind of some stats from 2022 on the number of safety checks that have occurred. Just as a final review here, and some key takeaways, we know working alone is a common hazard that must be controlled as per the regulations. It's the law, so we need to be doing this. In addition to assessing risks and developing clear policy and procedures, a critical component is ensuring that system of regular contact is in place. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge here is, how do we do that? We can try to do this, sort of manually, and maybe if we only have a couple of lone workers, that we might be able to manage that, but it really becomes a challenge if we're talking about lots of different our staff members working alone, working in isolation at different times, and how best to do that. And systems out there, we literally could be doing, the automated systems can be doing hundreds, if not thousands, of safety checks in any given week, and that's just something that's nearly impossible to consider doing manually. So, implementing technology will ensure consistency and reliability, and most importantly, will ensure that your company and your employees are protected. And yes, it can be a very affordable and cost-effective method of managing this hazard. So, Made in Manitoba solutions. Just know that they are out there, and we do have a great partnership with the S2S, and if you visit the S2S website there and go to the members perks section there, you'll learn a little bit more about some of what we can offer there as well. And we have, in terms of our system and free trials. And so that kind of concludes this part of the presentation. And I'll turn things back over to Kat here, and we'll open the floor up to any questions that anybody might have here.
Yeah, thank you, Randy, for all this information. It is really important that we have a solution to address these hazards when we are talking about or having a situation identified as working alone or working in isolation. And I guess now it's the part where if you have any questions for us, if you have any situation that you are not sure whether it's considered working alone or not, you can share that with us right now if you want to share with the whole group, or just contact us after the webinar uh, ends, and we can go through with you on those situations and see what you have in here. So if you have any questions, just write in the chat the questions that you have. And I would say it's important for you to have in consideration one thing that I mentioned in the definitions and the steps of implementing the legal requirements. And then Randy mentioned something about it and how the controls needs to be related to the hazards that a specific situation is presenting for the worker. So if you are having a worker who is working at home that day, so maybe the risk is not that high that if you have someone driving along to a remote location in the province, so the hazards are higher, the risks is higher. So we need to have the control that represents that kind of, or that assessment of the risks of each situation. The good thing with the solution that Randy presented us is how flexible it is, that you can adjust those controls according to the risk assessment that you are doing for a specific situation. And with this, okay, so we have here a question from Kevin. What is this and how much? So, Randy, if you want to explain the what is this part, and I guess the how much would be directly with you.
Yes, I was just trying to view that question as well. That's in the Q&A here, or?
Yeah, it is in the chat. I'm seeing in the chat of the meeting.
It's okay, there we go.
Kevin.
Oh, there he goes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I got it here. So yeah, thanks, Kevin. What is this and how much? So, I really wish we could have played that video there, but and on our Protelic CheckMate, if you see on the screen right now, you'll see our ProtelicCheckMate.com website, and under the section there, we have a lot of videos for this that are listed on our site there, and that'll certainly give you a little bit better idea. But really, our system is again, a proactive, automated safety check-in system that comes in now in an app form. It allows people to, very simply, users to simply tap their button to start safety checks, change frequency, signal for an emergency. There's an emergency button in the app as well. There's a complete client administrator dashboard. It's all under the resources tab if you're looking for some information there on our website, and some of those videos as well that could be reviewed. But and in terms of pricing, pricing can vary. Kind of, it is kind of depends a bit on, of course, volume, number of users, but also a little bit on, we always look at a little bit of usage. And if you have sort of those users that are going to be needing it, or staff that are going to be, using the system, every single day, versus those very infrequent users. But maybe as at the absolute highest end, if you really want to look at this as, around the $20 per month per user as a high-end number, single user rates, you could probably start around there. But again, we really work with clients to kind of really determine what their needs are. There's also the way the response protocols can be to the alert contacts can also affect pricing as well. So we like to just have those conversations, really understand your needs, and then work with you to come up with the best pricing option available.
Okay, thank you, Randy. And we have another question here from Neil Armour. He says the biggest challenge he faces is the poor cell service in rural areas. I like the tech option, he said, but when no cell service it has caused problem in the past.
Yes, that's a great question. That comes up very often. And, we think about rural areas, and sometimes we know dead zones can be even in urban places. We could think about like a crawl space or a, parkade or somewhere where you're suddenly, you don't have cell service. So we always like to, there's one thing about our system is there's multiple ways for a user to interface with the system. It's not just through the app. And that is, so one of the ways we feel is that, you could potentially work with the system as it is, where you may know when you're going into these areas in a rural area, for example, if you're going to be in a spot with no cell phone coverage, where you could, if you're going to be in that area for, say, an hour, you could set your safety check frequency to an hour. You could do a proactive check-in right then when you're going into that sort of area of no coverage, and then check in. And then if you come out of that area, say in 45 minutes, you could check in again. But if you didn't check in that hour, then of course, the system's going to do what it's going to do. You wouldn't respond. An alarm would go off, a missed safety check alarm would go off in our monitoring center, and assistance would be provided. We'd be notifying alert contacts, and they would be following up on you. So that is one way of using frequency to potentially, and doing proactive check-ins when you're going into an area of no coverage. Another way is to potentially call in through a landline. That's another way of interfacing with our system, to check in through, if you had access to the internet through a web portal. There's a texting option. So even if you just had a Wi-Fi connection and could text in to the system, that's another way to check in. So there's various ways of interfacing with the system that we think can help in those situations. Before, the final option might be to introduce satellite technology for complete off. And we work with Zoom. Zoleo is a device that we don't provide the device, but our system works very well with a Zoleo text communicator, satellite text communicator device. And so we will work with you to come up with the best option as well there, and really try to maybe help provide some of these other options first before you might find those helpful first before, ultimately maybe getting into satellite technology.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Randy. But we don't have any more questions so far in the chat. But I really want to highlight the fact that if we recap the legal requirements, it's not only about having the solution. I mean, you can jump straight to having this CheckMate implementing at your workplace. You need to have the risk assessment. You also need to have your safer procedure and everything that really you need to manage and address the hazards as a whole, not only having the solution. This is part of how the employers can comply with the legal requirements, but let's not forget of the other legal requirements too, which I think it's important to have in mind. This is our website too, and for you as our members, that we provide safety resources for all of you, for our members. So in any case that you consider that you are having a working alone or working in isolation situations, and you need to implement all the legal requirements, you can contact us and we can provide you with the program development guides to develop your own safer procedure, and we can work with you in the development or that safer procedure and make sure that you are in compliance with all the requirements there. Okay, so I guess we don't have any more questions. I don't know, Randy, if you want to give us another final input here.
Yeah, no, that just, appreciate everybody's time today and the questions we did have. And we hope that you got a lot of value out of this webinar today and this, the information we provided on this topic. S2S, again, we have a partnership with the S2SA. They are using our CheckMate working alone system themselves and have some direct experience there. Please feel free to reach out to myself here, and if you have any follow-up questions, if you think of something afterwards, and really we're here to assist you in any way we can. So again, thank you everybody for your time today, and look forward to the rest of your day.
Thank you, Randy. And again, even if it's easier for you to contact your safety advisor and then that person can put you in touch with Randy, we can do that too. So thank you everyone for joining us. See you. I wish you happy holidays, a happy ending of the year, and see you next year in more webinars like this one.
Great.
Thank you for being here and thank you for your time. Take care.
Hi, everybody.